Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and I'm so excited to have rejoining me as a co-splainer this week, Emily Yoffe. Emily, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I wish I could be with you in person.
Well, not least because that would put you in Canada and out of Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, that would be great.
I mean, just on all fronts. And now, it's like there's biblical punishment going on because you're having like some ridiculous heat wave.
That's the usual. Yeah, that's the least of our problems.
Well, I'm feeling a nice breeze off the lake. So, sorry about that, Emily.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, you introduced me. I'll just preview the guest we're going to have, because then I want to talk to you about just a great article you had in this new vehicle, which I also want you to talk about. You introduced me or recommended JoAnn Wypijewski, JoAnn, who is a longtime editor.
I'm going to let you say her name.
Okay, I'll do that.
The whole time.
Wypijewski. Who is a longtime editor at The Nation and has just written, it's a collection of her essays, but it's called What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Me Too, Essays on Sex, Authority, and the Mess of Life. And I just love it. And it's so interesting to hear a lot of the views we've expressed on this podcast coming from someone who is a longtime member of the left. So
I know. We must have had the same experience reading and going, oh my God, I'm having a mind melt with this woman over space and time.
I know. It's so I'm thrilled, and so we'll get into that. But you just there's a new I want to call it publication, but of course it's like an online journal called Persuasion, which has been created by Yascha Mounk, who we all love. Yascha. He's based in DC. He's you'll have to remind me of the think tank from which this is emerging. But basically, he was on this letter that a lot of journalists signed to protest the censorship that is taking place in the media and elsewhere. And so he's created this site called Persuasion. And you have just published an article in it called The Taxonomy of Fear, which is fantastic, breaking down the culture of cancellation, I guess, and sort of helping us understand it in order to counter it better. Is that a fair summary?
Very fair. Let me say a word about Persuasion. It's not just, it's a site and they're publishing things, but if you want to find it, it's persuasion.community, because what Yascha is trying to create is a community beyond just a place to come read things. He's having events, book clubs. At some point, we'll be able to gather as human beings, but it's a place where people can express their ideas, written ideas, communicate with each other, have debates. He's already had a couple of debates and events, and it is about recognizing that an open society requires an ability to be open, for people to feel free to express and explore ideas without the fear that, as we're seeing today, literally retweeting something, saying a wrong adjective, acknowledging pain and hurt insufficiently is enough to destroy one's livelihood and career. This kind of punishment is not just coming to elite people, which is sometimes the critique. The fear is spreading all through society. And this is just not going to help human flourishing, ability to work out difficult issues. And in Persuasion, it starts with a recognition that there are serious threats from the right, illiberal illiberalism growing, especially around the world in democracies, and authoritarianism that is a crucial danger. It also recognizes the work that needs to be done in our society and all societies to deal with racism, sexism, inherent problems is far from done. But it's saying there is a growing illiberalism on the left and a culture of fearfulness, and we need to address that. Just the way the right needed to address the rise of Donald Trump and stand in opposition to him. Sometimes people say, look, we've got Donald Trump. Everything else doesn't matter. It does matter, because if you don't stand up and stop things before they go too far, then you've got an even worse problem.
Well, and as you note in the article, what used to seem, or not be dismissed because I always take it seriously, but seemed to be confined to college campuses, is now like coming to an HR department near you. And we're seeing, and this is not just in companies, but in journalistic institutions like the New York Times and others, where pretty much Barry Weiss, in her wonderful memo that when she quit the New York Times, noted that it was now being run by Twitter. It was now being edited by Twitter. But it's also being edited by HR departments. And in journalism, where the very foundation of debate and listening and inquiring about the other side and reporting on all sides is a very sinister development. And I'd love to go quickly through, you did do a taxonomy, and you broke it down, this cancellation culture, into five types, I guess. The first one, you said, maybe you could just give like a line about what you mean by each one. And you preface this by saying, we live in a time of personal timorousness and collective mercilessness. That was so good.
Thank you.
So first one was safetyism.
Okay, so safetyism comes from a fantastic book that people who are concerned about all this should read, The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. And they identified this idea. And again, you're absolutely right, Danielle. Campuses are the laboratory. Mm-hmm. And those of us who've been writing about stuff going on at campuses, years ago, people used to say, okay, those crazy kids and their crazy professors, they're going to come out in the real world and the real world's going to punch them in the face. Yeah. And we've been saying, no, they're going to punch you in the face. So this idea, which spread like wildfire on campuses starting around 2013, is that words are violence, and words and ideas and even people who one finds disturbing or upsetting create actual physical and psychological danger. And this is now, it used to be, what are they talking about? Now we all know what that means. And it is a very effective and dangerous way of shutting down all debate, especially about difficult and complicated issues, because how do you discuss something or disagree or challenge ideas if the other party says, I am actually in physical danger right now? That's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, I guess that old idea of use your words is now that words are as dangerous as your fists, apparently.
Look, this started as I was documenting on campus sexual assault and the growth of Title IX, which is the law that covers sexual assault on campus bureaucracies. And there are many documents which explicitly said unwanted words are sexual violence. Yeah. So this idea has been percolating on campuses for years and is now broken out, as we saw in the firing of James Bennett at the New York Times, who was their editorial page editor. he was fired over running an op-ed by Senator Tom Cotton saying, in the case of riots, federal troops should be called in. And New York Times staffers didn't just object that they found this op-ed morally repugnant, or that it was Cotton's particular essay did not meet the standards of the Times. They said his op-ed endangered them physically. They were particularly, the Black staffers said, this op-ed puts us in physical danger.
Yeah.
And that was the turning point in the publisher. The publisher had initially supported the column, not because he agreed with it, but because op-ed pages should run things that many people consider obnoxious. And Tom Cotton is a powerful person.
Right, especially when it's a
we
senator.
are now seeing
that's news.
A senator who's being
news.
talked about, that's right, as a potential presidential candidate. So it was very interesting to see this idea now come into the workplace full bore. And, one of the things I want to say is we've got to roll that back, because we have to be able to talk about difficult things without saying this can't be discussed because I'm in danger. So that's one of them.
You had
another one is
contamination by association. This is very sinister. To explain that one, that is very, because it's now not just the words you say.
This is the idea. And I think any of us who are foolish enough to be on Twitter and, we're thinking, oh, I like that, I might retweet that. Wait a minute, this person, what has this person said in other contexts about things? Because I'm going to, if I like something said by someone, I now become responsible for everything this person has said because I'm affiliating myself. So the idea is that you are not just responsible for everything you've said and done, which is, we're seeing people get destroyed because of idiotic things they said years ago. So there's a problem with that idea. But now, if you sign an open letter with other people, you have taken on all their ideas and their body of work.
Or
so
I'm
any
sure their
kind
experience, like if they get, it's discovered they had a traffic violation or, DUI or something, that like you're going to be blamed now for that too. I mean, there's nothing, it's not even their words.
It's more, it's not done randomly. It's done to say these people's ideas are not acceptable. And if you affiliate yourself, if you go on a podcast, if someone goes on a podcast and you are the host, well, everything you've said or written in your whole life, Danielle, then this other person is assumed to be endorsing by sitting across the microphone from you. I mean, this is just absurd.
Yeah. And then,
let me say, it's absurd on its face and it's ridiculous. But it also, again, the dangers of these things, how do you build communities? How do you build communities across ideological lines or even within them? Because you end up looking at other people as potential landmines. I don't know what everyone has said and done. So you just retreat to your own little shell. Again, that is not healthy to an open society.
And then you had, I'll read a couple of, you said intent is irrelevant. Yep, that speaks for itself. It doesn't matter how you intended it. You're immediately assumed to the worst of all possible motives. The reporting, and then they report you to the authorities. That happened to us. It's still happening to us on all social platforms, where we ran a photo to accompany this episode on transgenderism among young women with Abigail Schreier, and these activists were insisting we take this photo down, and when we didn't, they kept reporting us to Twitter, and Twitter kept clearing us that we hadn't violated anything, and yet they still. It's like, okay, so now we're going to start bombarding you with all caps tweets calling you names, of course, but insisting you take it down and threatening you, like as if that, is going to be more effective. But you see, they are very, very accustomed to intimidating people. They automatically report you to the authorities. I mean, it is a little bit like, the old Soviet Union, where you spy on your neighbors and report them if you feel they are transgressing in any way. But so yes, and usually the authorities collapse, which is awful, which results in your last point called the chilling effect.
Right, because everyone you can't think or act spontaneously. You can't float ideas. You can't even make mistakes. If you feel I'm being watched every word, you had a lengthy discussion, but you put up an image and that gets you reported.
Right.
So, people are fearful, intimidated, afraid to defend other people who they may agree with. So this silencing and intimidation is absolutely real. You've experienced it. It's going on, and it's just not healthy. Let's engage with each other with ideas, debate the ideas on their merits, and not try to constantly attack and tear down in silence.
Well, before we bring JoAnn down, I'll just warn you. I want to, because I was left a little frustrated at the end of the article, because I want to know, okay, so what are we going to do? And maybe this is a question for JoAnn as well. Here we are, different political backgrounds, but how I think mutually united in this goal to fight back. So we can talk about that. All right. Well, we're going to bring on JoAnn. Hang on. Let me pronounce this right. We're going to bring on JoAnn Wypijewski. What we don't talk about when we talk about Me Too. That's a kind of riff on a Raymond Carver collection of short stories. Essays on sex, authority, and the mess of life. Let's bring her on. JoAnn, welcome to the program. We're so thrilled to have you.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you very much. And
you're coming to us from looks like your study or your library in New York City. Is that right?
It's all those things. It's my living room. I have a, one bedroom apartment in New York City. So this is basically where I work and live. Yeah.
Well, it looks beautiful. There's definitely books for your wallpaper. For them who can watch this.
It's not bad.
Yeah, my office looks like a dump, I realize.
Pretty good background.
Yeah, don't let Room Raider come to you, Emily. It'll be
okay.
So JoAnn, what is fascinating is that you've come from, as we said before you came on, this background at the Nation, and you've sort of come to a lot of the same conclusions that a number of us have been having about Me Too. Why don't you just start and tell us where you see yourself fitting in the feminist world? I started to think of you as a pro-sex feminist, and I didn't even know those existed anymore. And I don't know if that's what you'd call yourself.
I hadn't known that phrase existed for years, actually, until I discovered it kind of late in the 1990s. And I thought, oh, wow, these people seem to be really, they seem to get it. And I feel a kind of kinship with their writing. And I think it was that a number of the people who were in that strain were also really conscious of class. We're really class politics. We're really conscious of race politics. We're really conscious of the sort of complicated ways in which you have to analyze and everything, and in the ways that people really experience life, that it's not, I mean, that some things are very clear cut, but most things are murky. And when it comes to sex, as my friend and a person who I admire a great deal, Amber Hollibaugh, said, it's the first place we lie to ourselves. And so what that means in this realm that is one of the most important, intimate, valued things in human experience, if you're on the left and you don't take that seriously, you don't take sex seriously, you don't take it, how people relate to each other sexually seriously as an important element of your analysis, then you really can't understand humanity. You can't care about humanity. And so I think I came more to feminism through sex than I came to sex through feminism.
Is there pro-sex feminism today? You write so eloquently, and actually I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about this, how we've been in a sex panic as Americans, really starting at the end of the 19th century, but as you say, almost continuously since the mid-19th century. And that Me Too, which maybe we'll all agree, has done some really important things that some of the cases, just this grotesque harassment and abuse and damaging of women's careers. I was even shocked by some of the cases, and I thought I've reached an unshockable point. But very quickly, Me Too seemed to take a turn to good and evil, that there's no complication or ambiguity. We saw the rise of the Believe slogan. If someone comes forward with an accusation, it is prima facie true. And it seemed to fit in with some of these sex panics you describe, where society suddenly perceives a sexual danger, there are monsters, and we must rally and crush them. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what some of these sex panics were, and if you feel that Me Too has those elements?
Sure. I'm going to go back to the start of your question a little bit first, and the question of whether there are pro-sex feminists. It's a really strange time, and there's so many confusing, it's really a murk. There is mainstream feminism, and there is the devotees of Me Too. And at the same time, there is and has been for some time a movement of sex workers and for, the right of sex workers to be safe, to have their work decriminalized, to have it be considered work, etc. And what's odd is that some of the same people who are devotees of Me Too, still, I think it's important that #MeToo is really, I think, a legal and media and sort of crowd-defined phenomenon of shaming, blaming, punishing, and if possible, prosecuting. I think that's its ethos. I don't feel like, because of what you said, how quickly it went from a few people talking about something that happened to some rhetoric that really we would not accept under any other circumstances. People being thrilled at feeling powerful, the ability to hurt someone, the ability to destroy someone. People saying, oh, piff-poff, so a few innocent people are hurt. this was somebody in Teen Vogue or Elle or something, I can't remember, but said, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Well, as of course she would never have to pay it. It's just striking. Now, it's true, you can say anything you want on Twitter, and the media do allow for a certain kind of recklessness of speech. But I think the get 'em mentality is what relates it to all of these other sex panics, because if you go back from the late 50s, or actually before that, the whole the whole sexual psychopath phenomenon in a lot of cities and in the federal government was side by side with the Red Scare. It meant homosexuals, and it was a way of getting rid of homosexuals, but also, naming them, shaming them, putting them in mental institutions, deciding that they were sick and wrong and dangerous and were going to kill your children. And so it was a politics of fear and arousal, and a kind of what Roger Lancaster calls a poisoned solidarity, that by which all the good people, all the innocents, are able to feel a sense of mutual identification by their zeal to get the bad guy. And those kinds of things, we've seen over and over again in scandals, much more famous, well-known, the Satanic Panic scandal and the priest scandal, and the explosion of talk about campuses as just complete rape fields, which you have written so well about. And we could go on and on. The predator, the danger, the stranger danger, the super predator, the internet predator, the AIDS predator. I mean, on and on and on. But what is central to all of them is that there is someone very bad or a type that is very bad, and they are evil. They are monsters, and anything goes, really, to get them. And they can be, considered almost people without rights, people who are pronounced guilty upon accusation, who, do not require the presumption of innocence, who can be tried in the press. Sex panics are also called moral panics. And what that implies is that there is a kind of moral purity among those who are doing the accusing. And there's a kind of innocence. And purity politics is very dangerous. Purity politics is essentially authoritarian. And so I think that that the recent some of the recent things we've seen around speech and around shutting people up over various political matters are part of a culture and a society and a media that has long accepted, this kind of us against them, good guys versus bad guys, but particularly people who are righteous and pure versus, the demon who ought to be shunned, exiled, etc. And this is not just obviously a matter of speech. I mean, when it comes to the terrorist, for instance, when it comes to the sex offender, who is always an offender, I mean, no matter how long he's been in prison or how long he's been out or how long he's done nothing, he is forever an offender. These figures can be completely put in a separate category of human being. And they don't require us to have the normal feelings for, or certainly bring the normal kind of complicated analysis toward, or even listen to. And certainly their accusers, are not to be questioned.
Ladies, let's just pause the conversation there for a second so we can go to a message from this week's sponsor, Brooklinen. If you, like me, have been spending some of your time in quarantine fixing up your house, or maybe just noticing everything that's wrong with it, there are small ways to make your home feel more comfortable and luxurious without breaking the bank. And one of them is by upgrading your linens and towels. Now, you've heard us talk about Brooklinen before and how they're the home of the internet's favorite sheets, and also my favorite sheets for summer, spun from the lushest and lightest linen. But their towels? They're also amazing. There came a point when I realized my towels were so old, they were exfoliating rather than drying me. But the Brooklinen towels, they are so plush. It's like the perfect hug to start my day off right. Like a little, you're going to do great. And you know what? They're so cozy and warm. I believe them. They embrace me. And you know what? These days, it's perfectly fine to stay in your towel all day after you shower. Sometimes I'll just stay in my towel till I'm ready to shower again. That's called efficiency. And Brooklinen towels not only make it possible, they make it comfortable. Brooklinen is the perfect place to find all the comforts for home, including these ultra soft towels. They're so confident in their product that everything comes with a lifetime warranty. Use promo code FEMSPLAIN for 10% off your first order at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com, promo code FEMSPLAIN.
You made a kind of sly reference to what it's like to try to be a journalist, particularly, and you're a journalist writing for left-wing publications, trying to get this message across. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your own experiences trying to do this, because in my writing about campus sexual assault, we've both been journalists for decades. I mean, journalists are life's skeptics and misfits,
Right.
but not on some subjects.
Yeah.
And it's really been remarkable, particularly, I will use the phrase, mainstream media, to see the most important institutions even fail to apply basic journalistic principles of let's check out both sides as best we can. Are these stories more complicated than we're hearing? I mean, just the basics.
Right.
And so what has it been like for you? Danielle and I were talking about, reading your fabulous essays, and particularly your title essay, which so describes this moment and how we got here and this kind of frenzy for punishment, and you're standing against it. So have you been expelled? How are you able to do this work?
No, I mean, I'm very grateful that Katrina vanden Heuvel at The Nation commissioned that piece back in 2018, What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Me Too. It was not a popular piece at the magazine, for sure. It really was not, but fortunately, The Nation does still publish some unpopular pieces. And what I was interested about that piece, though, I had written that piece very carefully because I really felt that we needed to have a more complicated discussion, and that things had got off the rails, and that, as you said at the beginning, well, I'm skeptical of media frenzies from jump. So I didn't applaud it right away, but I thought, okay, well, obviously, we know there's violence. We know we know the workplace is not a good place. We know that women have been demeaned and assaulted, and lots of people have been demeaned and assaulted. And all people in most places, one time or another, on their jobs have been humiliated, if not
Men and women.
Men and women, all people, right? So I was listening to this debate or discussion, which was not a debate, and I felt that we really needed to complicate this discussion. You know, if we want to be serious about violence, if we want to be serious about sexual politics, and if we want to be serious about what happens between people sexually, then we have to also try to, you know, it's like a chain, like you have a chain and it gets, raveled, and then it takes a long time. Eventually, you get it unraveled. But I felt that we needed some discourse, especially among people on the left. It was being written in the Nation, so it's kind of liberal to left, And what I was surprised about, so I wrote it I called it an invitation. And I really hope, because there was so much discussion at the time, that it would be taken up in some way. I mean, whether it would be attacked, whether it would be praised, whether it would be, just grappled with. I was pretty astonished because it was ignored, completely ignored. And I think it was ignored because it could not be full-throatedly praised by the devotees of Me Too, #MeToo, and it couldn't be attacked as just the rantings of some denialist. There were too many serious issues in it. There are too many serious questions. We don't talk about how movements or phenomena or media frenzies contribute to the idea of naming, shaming, prosecuting, and imprisoning. We're not serious about a politics of abolition.
I was really rocked by your piece on Paul Shanley, the priest, who, I'm from Massachusetts. He was, I'm not Catholic, but I'm from Newton, where he was a priest for many years. And I remember he was presented as one of the greatest monsters, prolific rapist, destroyer of boys. And I never knew anything other than that, and applauded when he was convicted. I remember driving by the church when I was home visiting, thinking, here is where these horrific acts took place. And Danielle, you and I were talking, JoAnn has written an essay in this book essentially saying this whole accusation and trial of him was a complete, bogus, recovered memory fiasco. And there's no evidence that he did any of these things. And it's really shocking, and I don't think this is known except by people who happen to read your essay.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, he's just regarded as a horrible individual and a monster who raped children weekly, and who served 12 years in prison for it. And interestingly enough, because the case was so bad, the prosecutors, first of all, there were 4 accusers initially, and the prosecutors dropped 3 of them. And all of them had just recovered their memory on the same basis, and exactly the same memory. And they said they suffered mass amnesia every week. And then every Sunday went to the priest like lambs, like to the slaughter, had no idea that they were going to be raped again, immediately had amnesia, were raped again, on and on for years. Their mother, one case, the mother was the CCD teacher, the religious instruction teacher. She said, well, I never noticed anything about the kid. So his year got put back, but the other kids' years all stayed the same. Anyway, the prosecutors wisely dumped 3 of the 4 accusers, who all had the same lawyer, who all went to the same therapist, who all told a version of the same story. And they only tried one. And then his memories devolved on the stand until the point where, these heinous accusations had significantly shrunk. He was caught misrepresenting himself many times. It didn't matter. Everybody who was ever, in the church at the time said, we never sent the kids to the priest. The priest never pulled kids out. This was a Sunday. It was the busiest day on the mass of the week for a priest. He couldn't have, it was in between masses. He couldn't have accomplished this. Anyway, none of it mattered. None of it mattered. And the press, which had taken its story of this priest completely from the personal injury lawyer who was representing one of the accusers, and then ultimately all of the accusers, they just were stenographers, They just took down whatever he said. And he had given a very lavish press conference with PowerPoint, and he used all these documents that the church had released, and he put very specialized quotations, extracts from these documents, and he put them up, and for 2 hours he did a show, and then just in time for the journalists all to rush to their typewriters, to their room, to their newsrooms, and file. And it's interesting that both the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald used the word depraved, and the most depraved, that Shanley was the most depraved priest ever after this press conference. Some of the journalists I hear were crying during this. They didn't read the documents. They couldn't have read the documents. I got the documents too. They did as well, but I'm sure they never read them. There were over 1,000 pages. And you could see, I got also the CD, that had the lawyer's extracts. I wasn't at the press conference, but I saw the extracts, and then I looked at the real documents, and I thought, oh my God, this extract, is taken completely out of context. Or something is assumed based on a line in an article, which can't be assumed. So, but to this day, people say certain things that Paul Shanley did, which just are not true. They are repeated. They have been repeated over and over and over again in newspapers.
It does feed into one of the themes of your book that I found really interesting, which is the sort of criminalization of sex. And we see this very pronounced during, as you put it, the hashtag #MeToo. You had a wonderful line that you said, some of it is the result of trying to protect everyone from the consequences of desire. And I was thinking about that line of yours and thinking, is it partly, just as we've had helicopter parents and parenting who may or may not be responsible for what is going on at college campuses, this idea, that you can't hear anything that offends you, that's an act of violence. In a way, making sex dangerous, making it this scary thing is also part of that generational desire to just protect kids from the consequences of everything unpleasant. That it was just a passing thought, but how did sex get criminalized this way? Why is it? You're passionate about charging minors as adults for sexual crimes. What is it about this that is moving it in this direction?
Well, sex has been criminalized for a long time. That's not new, and homosexuals particularly were criminalized, until recent memory. So, sex for pay, prostitution is still criminalized. So, there's a long history of that. I think that the obsession with safety now, ought also to be seen as part of a process in which, which also goes back to the sex panic idea, that everyone is unsafe. That in the stranger danger period, a child would be snatched in the 70s. Eitan Patz, for instance, very famously. And it's a terrible thing. The child disappeared. But the media, of course, was very excited about this story. The parents were grief-struck.
This was of a 7-year-old boy who really was the worst nightmare of any parent. He was walking home from school, I think in Greenwich Village, and he vanished, and it was a stranger. And that led to the milk carton movement, and parents ceasing to let kids go anywhere by themselves. It was a big panic. Yeah.
It was the first day he was allowed to go to school on his own.
Ugh.
And it's a terrible, horrible, tragic story. The question is, what made it a panic? Because awful things have happened to children forever. Yeah. I mean, children have disappeared. They've been killed. They've been kidnapped. They've been snatched. It's
rare. It's
rare.
It's very rare.
Very rare. What made it suddenly a frenzy, and all those children being put on milk cartons? Most of those children, P.S., were not snatched.
Not taken by parents in divorce.
They were picked up by a parent who was the non-custodial parent in a divorce case or in a post-divorce case. Or somebody who the parent knew. They weren't kidnapped. But I think all of the sort of anxieties and fears of the age, in the sort of 60s to 70s period, sort of focused on, this notion of innocence, children being incredibly vulnerable. And so around that same time, you have the satanic panic, which is completely made up of children in daycare. Right?
This was, the satanic panic was the idea that daycare providers were literally performing satanic rituals, raping children, killing animals, maybe even some killing children, although no, this was a real Salem psychotic frenzy because, as you say, Eitan Patz actually was kidnapped by a stranger. As horrifying as it is, the satanic abuse was completely made up, and it's had no grounding.
Huge, and celebrities were tweeting against, or not tweeting,
absolutely.
Twitter, but it was a huge, and the people went to prison for this.
Yes, they went to prison, and even after, it was the longest case. McMartin case was the longest case in American history. It ended in acquittals and then dismissal, and even still, people marched behind a banner saying, "Believe the children," or "I believe the children," and that was
believe women.
One of the first movements.
First believe. We have to believe the children. Well, the irony of that was that none of the children were believed when they said nothing happened. They said, "Oh, we know something happened. Keep telling us." They were basically tortured. They were interrogated. Little children. We're talking children
3 years old. Yeah.
Little children. Yeah. They're in with a therapist who's saying who says she's a feminist and she's against violence. And she says something had to have happened here, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. And she tells the kids, and fortunately she videotaped it, and this is how the whole case blew up. She videotaped it, and it was very clear she wouldn't take no for an answer. And it was only after prodding and hours, and the kids are alone, and she's saying, "You won't see your parents until you tell me." And we know all these things happen. And so the children make up the most amazing stories. And then people say, well, children wouldn't lie. And you're thinking, are you kidding? Now, almost nobody challenged that.
They lie like little rugs all the time, as any parent knows.
Yeah. So Debbie Nathan did wonderful reporting at the time, and then a wonderful book called Satan's Silence with Michael Snedeker. But I think children being these sort of innocent, these sort of models of innocence, then became the objects upon which people could project, their endangerment. People could project their all their fears and anxieties and their desire to solve, problems, whatever problem there was. And so you had consecutive laws named after children that made, the punishment system more and more and more ruinous, really, for anyone accused of a sex offense. Because typically when people are accused, most people don't get trials anyway. So you're accused, and if you're accused of sex offense, you're usually told, well, plead guilty and it'll go easy on you. And then they do, and then they're on the registry for 10 years, 15 years, life, and they can't work and they can't take their kids to school. Sometimes they can't live with their kids. If they're youths themselves living with their parents have to live under all kinds of strictures, like no alcohol, even if alcohol had nothing to do with it, no baby pictures, even if babies had nothing to do with it. And, it's very easy to write law. It's very easy to add punishment. It's a very cheap way of addressing any kind of a problem or any kind of social anxiety.
And one thing that happens is you're talking about the satanic abuse. I think one of the most damaging things about the aftermath is that there was really no aftermath. There was, it was this insane created frenzy that happened, as Danielle says, all over the country. Yeah. Liberal progressive Massachusetts was one of the worst states. And even after the frenzy dissipated, people continued to serve in prison and prosecutors continued to fight against their release from this made up thing. But what happened in this nation, we needed to have some kind of truth and reconciliation or some process by which we said, how did this happen? How did the criminal justice system, how did the psychological psychiatric profession get taken in by this? How do we prevent this happening again? And that never happened. It just disappeared.
And also, how did the media?
Yes.
Right. Well, it's this
sources. Whose sources were the psychiatrists, were the cops, were the various authorities who were spinning this kind of stuff, who their sources were, that was the story they told. Or the parent who started it, an adult who was psychotic.
Yes.
The police knew that the parent who started the McMartin case was psychotic, but they felt it was a runaway train.
Right.
But it fits. Right.
It fits in with what you're saying about these. Sorry. It fits in with what you're saying about these wandering, that the mobs move through time, and this need to find these figures of good and evil, even in the most far-fetched scenarios, as the satanic panic. I like that word for it. One of, I thought, the spicier things in your book you compared the sexual accusations today in, now I think I'm always now going to call it #MeToo, similar to what white women did in the pre-civil rights area against black men, that the accusation would be made, the accused would have no right to a hearing, and punishment would ensue. Just before you came on, Emily and I were talking about, well, okay, so if we understand it and we see this going on, how do we deal with this? How are we going to stop this from happening? These false accusations, these trials, these non-trials. How do we fight back against this kind of mob rule?
How do we fight back? I think these things are I think these things are ultimately matters of consciousness and matters of how you see the world. And I think that as it was a movement, and if you look back, these sequential actions, the sequential panics, as it was created by people, it has to be undone by people. I think we have to challenge or raise the possibility that one is inculcated by the culture and by society into certain thinking, and how do we recognize that as a, because all these people talk about how the society or how the culture creates sort of racist tropes and racist thinking. Well, the society, the culture creates a lot of things that affect how we act, how we think, how we see the world. And the left or the woke or the youth, they're not immune from this either. And so I don't have, I'm not like a person with an action agenda. I think on the question of sex, certainly just on the simple question of sex and being safe and regret versus rape and decision making and how would etc. I think it would help a lot if we had actual sexual education in this country. I mean, we've all bumbled around is the fact of the matter. We've all bumbled around. We've all had sex we don't like. We've all had regrettable sex. We have to know the difference between regret and rape. We have to know the difference between a situation that's just icky or a situation.
And the opposite of that is what's happening, unfortunately, especially authority figures on campus, and I'm sure it's coming younger, instead of understanding, as you say in your book, you're probably going to be hurt at some point, and I don't mean physically attacked, but
emotionally.
Emotionally, sex is complicated, and how do you do anything but bumble as you're starting along, and it's not going to be perfect. And kids on campus are essentially told every moment, every touch must be at an ecstatic level, or else something wrong is happening. And that, I don't know who writes these. I mean, they must have, their sex lives
crazy,
phenomenal.
Sex, yeah.
Although you have the sense that they're not, because you think, are these people who've ever had sex? But
why can't we think in more complicated ways about something that we all know is complicated? Everyone knows this in their life.
Well, I think you've come up with a great new hashtag, which is #It's Complicated. And JoAnn, thank you for joining us today. It's been so interesting, and I really recommend the book to at least bring, I don't want to say 50 Shades of Grey, but certainly shades of gray to this other otherwise what we're facing today when we face Me Too in your book.
Having me on, I really appreciate being with you.
Well, that was interesting, and it's certainly interesting to hear a feminist of the left talking about thinking desire is important, sex should be fun. I mean, it's maybe it also isn't necessarily fun every time, especially when you're starting out. The whole complication of life, where we give kids this idea that they should know exactly what they want, and if they're not getting it, something's wrong, and someone should be complained to about it. And that's just an absurd way to go through life. Well, I wanted to follow up with you, too, on the question I asked her, and we talked about at the beginning about what do we do about this? That you just, I mean, in a way that her book is this history of moral panic aspect, it's like the caravan eventually moves on, and I'm starting to wonder, is cancel culture canceling itself finally? Like, are we all just eventually things go too far and they stop. Do you think we're seeing that a little bit, or do you feel we need to do more? And what is that?
I feel we're kind of at the beginning of, and it used to be called PC. Now we're calling it cancel culture.
Right.
And, it's a vague term, but I think you and did people have a general understanding? It's just kind of fear, self-censorship, worry that something, expressing a thought or even something completely inadvertent can be taken the wrong way and it spirals. And now with social media, even, normal people can find themselves in the middle of one of these things and life is ruined. So as we talked about, if you track from college to spilling out into society, this is just starting. I think this has been going on in colleges for a long time. And I don't think we're at the moment where people are kind of tacitly realizing that we've gone too far. I think a lot of people who feel silenced are maybe getting more, will be able to be more emboldened or empowered to fight back. But I think it's going to be very hard because, as you mentioned, for some reason, once this gets started, those in authority, those with the ability to say, look, this, this person didn't mean it. It's not a big deal. Forget it. Those people often say, doesn't matter what your intent was. There's a problem and we're firing you. So I think we're not at the counter reaction.
Right. Also, what she said I thought was interesting about having written that seemingly seismic article on the left, the essay that is the title of her book about Me Too, publishing it in The Nation, and then having zero reaction. That's also the problem.
Except within The Nation where people were angry.
Right, exactly. But it was like what we had Ann Applebaum on the program last week, and she talked about the letter that you and I were discussing. She talked about a letter that was sent around earlier to protest what happened at the New York Review of Books when Ian Baruma was forced to leave. And she said, and they made absolutely no difference. I mean, they were filled with illustrious names, and then, it's like when I hate to call it this, but when the culture has its teeth in the neck of something, it doesn't want to let go. It doesn't want to hear what it doesn't want to hear. And I feel that reading through her book, that this is just happens before until the mob or until the dog is ready to release, the writhing dead bird or wounded bird. We can't stop it. And no matter what we say or publish, it just falls into a canyon and goes unheard.
I think JoAnn's book very well lays out, and she does it quite efficiently, this whole 20th century of rolling panics. And some of them just grip the country and innocent people are destroyed and then they kind of go away. But the problem is the impulse moves on to something else.
Right.
We don't stop and say, oh my God, this was really ugly. I believed these crazy daycare accusations. How could I believe that? No, you just move on to the next set of monsters. She has a nice line, retribution a lot enlivens people regardless of ideology and has accelerated into ordinary, terrible fun. Mercy is the scandal now. And I think that's really true. And we now have a new technology to amplify and allow people to join virtual mobs instantaneously or sign petitions. Danielle, you see these petitions rise up. Get rid of this person. This person should be fired. This person shouldn't be a student here anymore. And gets thousands of names. And I've looked at these sometimes and said, have one of you read the case file, even all the articles about this? You know nothing about this, but there's a pleasure in the frenzy of taking people down. And so it's moved a little bit from the hashtag Me Too sex panic to just generalized you're racist or somehow you're violating new wokeness principles and you should be gone.
It's funny that I was thinking that this letter, this most recent open letter that was signed in the wake of the Barry Weiss, James Bennett mess, it had so many incredible names on it. Everybody from Winston Marsalis to J.K. Rowling to
Margaret
Atwood, figures in the United States. And that had less power than, as you say, a bunch of know-nothings going hysterical on Twitter. Like when you think about it, like as an editor, I would think, oh, I'd rather not piss off these guys than this chattering, bunch of bullies on Twitter. Like it's sort of astonishing that.
Well, we don't know the letter, this open letter, which was published in Harper's. We don't know what its effect will be. Yeah. Those of us, we talked about my piece for Persuasion and other people, people who've written the letter. John McWhorter is one of the signatories of the letter. He writes for The Atlantic and he's a linguist at Columbia. And he talks about, there are days he hears from dozens, he's heard from more than 100 academics who say, thank you for speaking out. I'm afraid to speak out, or I, have been the subject of this kind of cancel culture. So people are looking, I think, for voices of those saying, hey, we've got to stop. So I think the letter, I hope, will stand, and because of these illustrious signatories, maybe have a longer term effect. There need to be more things like that, more people writing, allowing people to say, wait a minute, why are we accepting, you say you're not safe, but actually we're safe here. So let's continue the discussion. Or intentions really do matter. You can't just say, I perceived it this way, if the person can clearly make a case that was not the intention. So I think JoAnn is right in a way, chipping away. What do you do except chip away?
And I guess the point of these letters too is, and statements and articles such as, you write so brilliantly, is you're also putting down markers, and and with this letter in particular, there's a community that has found itself. And I think that's what Yasha Monk is trying to do at Persuasion. At least
that's why I called it.
We're going to stand up for each other. You feel much less alone. And I keep thinking of these Cold War analogies. That's what those dissidents throughout Eastern Europe would do, that by publishing in the West, they found solidarity, with each other across from Poland to East Germany to Russia, and also protection because they spoke out. And if anything happened to them, it would be perceived because they spoke out. So maybe we're in this kind of dissident moment where we have to band together as dissidents and
well, Yasha's German, and he's called it, if you look it up, it's persuasion.community. Yeah. That's part of the point. And I've talked to other writers who write things that are not acceptable, and most of us are alone, and it's hard to do if it's just you that's kind of atomized. But if you feel, there is a group, and I don't necessarily agree with everything everyone in the group believes, which is one of the things to keep people from forming communities. You may have an obnoxious view on something that I don't share. Well, that's okay, because what we're all for is an open society, free expression. Of course, there are limits and boundaries, but they shouldn't be so narrowly drawn that someone who says a wrong adjective is in fear of their livelihood.
Right.
Which is where we are today.
Yeah. All right, Emily. Well, that was just a great, great discussion. Thank you. And thank you for co-splaining. Always love it when I have you as a co-splainer. If you like these
Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you via Zoom.
And I wish I were up there getting a cool Canadian breeze.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I just want to remind our listeners that if you like these discussions and want to keep them going and not see us silenced or canceled, we need your support. I was thinking, like, are we worth to you a cup of coffee a month, maybe even a nice cocktail or glass of wine a month? If you think you can afford that, to support us on patreon.com/femsplainers or glow.fm/femsplainers. You will keep us going. We really appreciate it. And we'll keep having wonderful femsplainers like Emily on. So thank you.
Thank you.
So listeners, stay with us next week. We're having on Sandra Singh Low. I'm just so excited to have her. She's so funny. She's author of many books, including the most recent, The Mad Woman and the Roomba. This will be the last of our summer author series. Joining me to co-splain will be the Wall Street Journal's Megan Cox-Gurdon. And then we'll have a little bit of break and then be back with a big fall season with a new lineup of co-splainers. And we'll have a little bit more listener reaction next week. But thank you and look forward to it. Bye.